On Halloween night 1992, the BBC would air a live TV show, a first for British TV. It was sure to be a hit. It certainly was, with over 30,000 phone calls received in its first hour on air. It is one of the most controversial TV shows in British TV history. It spawned the first ever reports of children being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder being caused directly by a TV show. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. Let's dive into the story behind GhostWatch and the BBC's attempts to cover it up. I remember watching the show live with my parents back in 1992. I was 13 years old at the time, and I honestly remember being terrified going to bed that night. It was on a Saturday night, and I remember Monday morning at school, everyone was talking about it, including the teachers. It was 1988, and a horror writer called Stephen Volk had just finished writing a pitch for the BBC about a groundbreaking new project. He had moderate success writing screenplays for horror movies, but this new idea, this was going to be the big one. It was original, and it was going to be awesome. So the original pitch was a 6-part limited series based on the paranormal. In his vision, there was a young female presenter who would be sent to investigate haunted houses and other locations. Back then, there were no such things as Most Haunted or any other form of reality ghost hunting type shows. This was to be a first, and would actually be the start of a trend of all manner of people investigating haunted locations, armed with night vision cameras, a psychic accomplice who would feel the spirit's presence. Back to the pitch. 6 episodes of the presenter discovering the background of these places filled to the brim with ghosts. Volk had an idea that the final episode would be broadcast live in a studio with a remote link to the crew at the haunted location. Then, as the episode ramped up, they would make it so that the ghosts got out of control and caused mass terror as the spirits themselves took over the entire production and invade even the live studio. It was a great idea on the surface and was penned as a mockumentary. Volk's agent, after speaking to the BBC, got back in touch with him. They were interested in the project, but they were wondering if they could condense the entire 6 episodes down to a 1-hour special that would be aired on Halloween night of 1992. Volk agreed to this, but suggested that they do this special like the original idea of the final episode and present it as a live broadcast, and more importantly, as if it was real. Stephen's idea came from books he read and shows that he watched as a kid that was framed as real. Everyone knows Bram Stoker's Dracula is a work of fiction. Well, I hope you all do. Yet the book was structured in such a way that it was a historical retelling based on a true story. So his agent agreed, and soon the production was greenlit. It was to be called GhostWatch, and it was going to be awesome. So the scripts were written and locations researched. But what they really needed to sell the story was well-known celebrities to get involved. Michael Parkinson was one of the biggest names in British TV at the time. He was a well-respected talk show host and radio personality. Parkinson's role would be based in the studio, where he would farm calls from the public and speak directly to the crew on location, much like that of a news anchor speaking to reporters live on the scene. The personality brought in as the main reporter and the young female presenter that Volk's idea demanded went to children's TV presenter Sarah Green. Back then, Sarah was a regular and familiar face to Great British TV, as she already presented several Saturday morning children's TV shows. She had received the script and immediately signed on. Sarah's husband, Mike Smith, was also well known to the UK audiences, as he too was a TV presenter and radio personality. He happened to read this script when Sarah had it and showed an interest also. Volk jumped at this idea of having a husband and wife dynamic, and it could potentially yield some interesting results. So Mike Smith was brought into the fold. Mike Smith, also known as Smithy, would be positioned in the studio along with Parkinson, not so much as a co-host, but rather like a live telethon. God, do you remember those? He would be the one gathering information from incoming phone calls, and there was a lot of them. The third performer to be brought onto the project was Craig Charles. By that time, he was already fairly famous in his own right, as he played Lister on the hit UK sitcom Red Dwarf. Nothing like this had ever been attempted before. It was before the found footage genre kicked off, it was before the Blair Witch Project was even thought of, and before TV shows like Most Haunted combined reality TV and ghost hunting. Heck, it was even before the internet. Yep, can you imagine? Before the internet. Reality TV and fiction were always separate. You were always fully aware if you were watching something factual like a documentary, or if you were watching a movie or TV show that was pure fiction. In 1977, a TV crew entered a haunted house in Enfield to investigate the Enfield poltergeist. But even then, that wasn't fiction dressed up as fact. Well, at least not purposefully by the creators of this documentary. Side note here, I've already done a full video on the Enfield poltergeist. I'll leave a link in the description below. Slowly but surely, the gap between science fiction and reality got smaller and smaller, to the point where one would be presented as the other. These days, the world is littered with paranormal investigation shows and teams of bearded men hunting for Bigfoot in the wilderness. Stephen Volk was smart enough to know that television was in a transitional period, splashing part truths with works of fiction, having the audience on Monday morning at work debating with colleagues as to whether or not what they saw at the weekend was real or not. The Enfield poltergeist case was a direct influence on how Volk wanted GhostWatch to be perceived. Producers at the BBC were actually a wee bit nervous about this part of the project. Like I said before, nothing like this had ever been done. So there was no precedent, there was no examples that they could work from. So they came up with a solution. They would add writing credits at the end of the show, and more importantly, at the very start, they would have the BBC announcer stating clearly that it was a work of fiction. During the 1 hour special, they would frequently display a free phone number that members of the public could call to tell their own paranormal stories. If this number was called, a pre-recorded message would tell the caller that the show was totally fictitious. The trailers, teaser and promo spots for this upcoming show was also explained that it was a drama piece created just for Halloween. They even ran an article in the week leading up to Halloween in the Radio Times explaining the project and that it was a drama. The only place that they never really said it was fiction was the live TV show itself. What could go wrong? Right? October 31st, 1992, at 9:25 PM, GhostWatch would air to 11 million people. This would be the highest viewed broadcast ever for a one-off UK special. Over the next hour, it's estimated that around 30,000 phone calls would come into the BBC switchboard at the same time. This caused the systems to crash. This in itself caused all manner of issues as technicians frantically tried to sort out this mess. But the BBC had a bigger problem on their hands. See, due to the sheer volume of incoming calls, the pre-recorded message at the start of the phone call never played. You know, the one that reassured people that it was all just fiction. Michael Parkinson introduces the viewers to the show. In it, he explained that the crew on location will be spending the night in a haunted house just outside the City of London. Mike Smith was standing by the bank of phones ready to take incoming calls. The stage was set, and it was time. So the location itself, the haunted house, mirroring that of the Enfield poltergeist case, the house was owned by a single mother and her 2 daughters. The story goes that the family were at their wits' end as they had been experiencing ever-increasing paranormal activity. Knowing that they were going to be filming the special and capturing the very real proof of ghosts, the BBC set up cameras in the house for a week prior to the live broadcast. Of course, the cameras picked up some frightening evidence. Objects are mysteriously tossed around the room as one of the girls screams that something grabbed her leg. Then, as the mother rushes into the room to the girl's aid, the bedside lamp can be seen exploding as the family flee. At this point, the show's host explained to the viewers exactly how the entire operation was going to run. They would explain all of the equipment and how it's being used before heading into the house itself to speak to the family inside. Back at the studio, they received a call that gets transferred through to Parkinson and Smithy. a woman was passed through to the studio where she explains to the hosts that the footage that was just shown of the girls in the bedroom had what appeared to be a shadow figure looming over the bed. Sure enough, the team replay back the footage. As the lights go out in the room, the silhouette of a figure can clearly be seen standing at the foot of the girl's bed, where, shortly after, she claimed to have been grabbed. To add more creepiness to this situation, the paranormal expert in the studio asks for the same clip to be played again, only this time the strange figure is absent. Not wanting to move on, they play the footage back a third time and deduce that it was nothing more than a dressing gown, and that the true cause for this mysterious silhouette was pareidolia. However, this mysterious shadow person appears a few more times during the production in various locations. It can be seen in the background of a few shots. One of these shots was even in the live studio. Parkinson and the investigator moved over to a large reel-to-reel so that she could let him hear an audio recording from one of her previous investigations. During this short sequence, a faint silhouette of a mysterious figure can be seen appearing behind them. The mother of the family speaks to Sarah about the cupboard under the stairs. She says that on one occasion when she was in there, she was effectively locked in by a mysterious force. Only then did she become aware of a male presence in there with her. Craig ventures out into the street to speak to the neighbours. Firstly, to see if they know anything about the strange things happening in the house, or even if they have any paranormal stories of their own. In the meantime, it's 10 o'clock and time for the girls to head for bed. The production team are waiting for some spooky goings on. Not long after the girls were sent to bed, the team downstairs started to hear strange banging noises from the floor above. Of course, cameras set up throughout the house were able to capture the true nature of these noises. As Sarah runs upstairs to see what's going on, the team back at the studio direct the camera operators controlling the camera on the top landing. That's when they catch the wee lassie bashing the pipes with what looks like a shoe. It's fairly clear now for all those involved that the whole thing is a simple hoax. Viewers and producers are deflated, until Mike Smith comes back with some more news from the phone lines. The male caller informed the studio that back in the 1960s, he was a social worker for a guy called Raymond Tunstall. Raymond was local to the area and lived in that very house. He served time in a mental asylum for committing some awful crimes against kids. The social worker goes on to say that Tunstall once confided in him that he felt like there was a woman living on the inside of his body and she needed to get out. He lived at that address with his aunt and uncle along with half a dozen or so cats. Apparently it all got too much for the guy and he took his own life under the stairs in the house. And then, well, the cats got hungry. A short time later, things ramp up pretty quickly, with rapping noises on the walls and the sound of cats screaming in the basement, as well as numerous technical glitches both on location and back at the studio. As the show gets to its inevitable climax, the ghost was able to invade the studio and possess the host, Michael Parkinson. So that was that. As I said at the start of the video, I remember watching this as it unfolded. I was 13 at the time, and of course had never seen anything like this before. I went to bed that night terrified, questioning reality, and couldn't believe that I just saw real proof of the paranormal. Now, of course these days, thanks to YouTube, the internet, and the evolution of these types of shows, this would not stand up and would be put into the comedy drama category. But back in 1992, people clearly took this a lot more seriously. Let's take a wee look at the aftermath. 12 hours later, and the show was featured on the front pages of nearly every national newspaper and tabloid. The BBC received a record number of complaints, and apparently one woman was claiming compensation for a new pair of designer jeans because her husband had shit himself during the live broadcast. A priest also contacted the BBC and said, although it was fictitious, by airing this live on the show, they somehow summoned real demons. Stephen Volk was personally attacked, also by a member of staff in his local store. In an interview, he said, The lady serving in my local off licence said, "I've got a bone to pick with you. My son wouldn't go to sleep till we took the luminous skeleton off the back of his bedroom door." To which I thought, what is he doing with a luminous skeleton on the back of his door in the first place? The thousands of responses to the show ranged from concern to downright ludicrous. However, for one family in particular, the ramifications were as severe as they could be. Martin Denham was 18 years old when the show aired, and after watching the show he sadly took his own life. He left behind a note for his family which read, "If there are ghosts, then I will be with you always, as a ghost." I feel I need to point out that Martin did have learning difficulties, and it's said although he was 18 years old, he had the mental age of a 13-year-old. Martin's home had some faulty pipes, which would often cause strange banging noises similar to those depicted on this show. This, as you can imagine, just poured fuel onto the already blazing inferno that was the colossal backlash from the public regarding this show. So what's the natural reaction from one of the world's largest TV networks? Let's lift that massive rug and with an ever bigger brush, sweep it right the way underneath, never to be mentioned again. The show was actually nominated for a BAFTA award. However, the BBC instructed the Academy to strike the show from all records. All British publications, including the Radio Times, were also instructed never to even mention the show. Things only got worse for the BBC, as people are not so quick to forget. 2 years later, a report was published with regards to two 10-year-old boys having been referred to psychiatry specialists by their own doctors, having suffered symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder as a direct result of having watched this live broadcast. It wasn't until a decade later, with that internet thing gaining traction, that forums would pop up all across the web discussing this GhostWatch. It soon became apparent that the show developed a loyal following, not because of its aftermath and trauma that it caused, but from an artistic standpoint. Many budding filmmakers thought that it was pure genius. With this renewed interest in the show, the BBC ventured into the basement and cranked open that big heavy door that they had locked for years, eventually letting some light and fresh air into the GhostWatch archives. They released a special edition DVD along with a personally written essay from the creator Stephen Volk. Volk said that he wanted the project to be a commentary on modern TV and what it's likely to become. Not only was he right, he was bang on the money. When I was a young teenager, I was always reading about and watching anything I could about ghosts, aliens and the paranormal. This wasn't because I was into that type of genre, it was purely because I wanted answers. I wanted to arrive into adulthood with the best, unfiltered, unbiased view of the world that I could teach myself. Ghosts, urban legends and even religion, I wanted to develop my own opinions, which I did. Had I watched this show a little bit later in life, then maybe I would have looked at it differently. Maybe I would have seen it for what it was intended to be. Maybe I would have seen it as I do now. So what about you? Did you watch this show when it aired? Have you seen it since? What's your first memories of seeing something like the Blair Witch Project or Paranormal Activity? I'm keen to hear from you all. That's me done for this video. If you're still here, then I sincerely thank you for staying with me till the end. Take care of yourselves and each other, and no matter what life chucks at you, remember, keep smiling.